Assalamu alaikum. This is Hena Zuberi, and you're watching Muslim Network News. Our top story continues to be the ongoing Israeli aggression against the Palestinians. This is the 10th day in a row. Israel continues its bombing and violence on Palestinians in Gaza, in Jerusalem, the West Bank, and beyond since yesterday. The death toll is now at 213 on the 10th day since the beginning of the Israeli bombing on Gaza. This includes airstrikes along with artillery and gunboat shelling. The dead include 61 children and 35 women. Overall, the number of injured is now 1,440, including 400 children and 270 women. Israel also bombed Gaza's only lab for processing tests for the COVID-19 virus. It will no longer be able to carry out testing. But Israel has not only targeted Gaza, the Israeli military is attacking Palestinians in Jerusalem, the West Bank, and in Israel itself. Israeli soldiers shot 64 Palestinians during protests in Ramallah. In the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood in occupied Jerusalem, Israeli soldiers also shot and injured 41 Palestinians, including a child near her home. Israeli soldiers killed Islam Ghayyad Mohammed Zahda, a 32-year-old Palestinian, near the Ibrahimi Mosque in the old city of Hebron. Later tonight, we'll be bringing you updates live from Gaza. Please keep watching Muslim Network TV. Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib confronted President Joe Biden over his support of Israel amidst bombing on Gaza. She spoke to the president on a tarmac in Detroit. That was where Biden had arrived to visit a Ford factory near her congressional district. She urged him to stop enabling the Israeli government in killing and harming Palestinians. Tlaib delivered a scathing attack on the House floor last week. She told President Biden that he must do more to protect Palestinian lives and human rights. Her comments came as Israel had scaled up its bombing campaign in the past week. There were no comments from the White House about this exchange. In his address at the Ford factory, President Biden, however, praised the Congresswoman.
And Rashid Tlaib, where's Rashid? I tell you what, Rashid, I want to say to you that I admire your intellect, I admire your passion, and I admire your concern for so many other people. And it's from my heart, I pray that your grandmom and family are well. I promise you I'm going to do everything to see that they are on the West Bank. You're a fighter, and God, thank you for being a fighter.
29 U.S. senators, led by Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont and Senator Jon Ossoff of Virginia, issued a statement on the issue. They asked Biden's administration to take immediate action to broker a ceasefire between Israel and the Palestinian Authority in Gaza. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi also called for a ceasefire, increasing pressure on President Biden. European Union foreign ministers also overwhelmingly called for an immediate ceasefire between Israel and the Palestinians in an emergency meeting on Tuesday. All EU member states backed a statement except Hungary. Palestinian business owners and workers put down their tools and shuttered their businesses on Tuesday. They were protesting the bombing of Gaza, mob attacks on Palestinian citizens of Israel, and the removal of Palestinians in Jerusalem's Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. It is a departure from the past when Palestinian citizens of Israel, Palestinians in the West Bank, and Gaza did not normally protest together. Palestinian citizens of the city of Lod marched to the center of the city to protest the violence against them. Israeli settlers and police have concluded to wage a campaign of removal and violence against Palestinians since the last week of Ramadan. Palestinians call it ethnic cleansing. The city used to be a major Palestinian town. It is now 70% Jewish Israeli, while the rest are Christian and Muslim Palestinians with Israeli citizenship. Apartheid in Palestine began with a terror campaign. The Haganah terrorized Palestinians into leaving their land. Let's go to Ali Khalaf and Saliha Farouk to find out more about the Haganah.
The Haganah is a Jewish underground terrorist group. It was established in 1920. To expel the indigenous Palestinians from their land, this group had massacred them. A senior officer of the Haganah, Yosef Namani, wrote the following words in his diary on November 6, 1948. In Safsaf, after the inhabitants had hoisted the white flag, they gathered the men and women into separate groups, bound the hands of 50 or 60 villagers, shot them, then buried them all in the same pit. They also raped several women from the village. Where did they learn such behavior as cruel as that of the Nazis? One officer told me that the most ferocious were those who had escaped the camps. The Haganah also bombed bridges, rail lines, and ships. The terrorist group received clandestine military support from Poland. British estimated that the Haganah's strength was between 30,000 to 70,000 people. The Haganah was successful in displacing almost 800,000 Palestinians from their ancestral lands. Once Israel was established, the Haganah turned into the Israeli military. The name Haganah is the middle name of the Israeli army, which continues its destruction of Palestinians. Some Haganah terrorists became the leader of Israel. Haganah later became the core of the Israel Defense Forces, and a large number of its members are leaders of the state. Haganah means defense in the Hebrew language. It was established in Jerusalem in 1920 during the British occupying of Palestine. The main goal of Haganah is to expel Palestinians from their lands and settle in their place as Jewish immigrants. The Haganah has committed many war crimes, including the annihilation of Palestinian villages and towns and the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from their lands. The military group also helped other Zionist organizations commit massacres against Palestinians. The Deir Yassin massacre is one of them.
United States House Democrats are pushing a bill to investigate the insurrection on January 6th. There's a lot of pushback from the Republicans. The bipartisan bill will appoint a commission to investigate the riot, which killed 5 people, including a police officer, but it faces opposition from top Republicans in Congress. The bill will set up a 10-member panel appointed by Democratic and Republican leaders to study the insurrection. The bill can pass the House with little or no GOP support, but it will need 10 Republican voices in the Senate. A House vote is expected soon. India confirmed that over 4,000 people have died from COVID-19. This is the highest number of deaths since the pandemic began. Scientists say that these tallies are vastly undercounted. Some journalists have estimated that the numbers of dead per day to be 5 to 10 times higher. Dr. Anthony Fauci has said that COVID vaccines authorized in the United States are effective against the Indian strain of the virus. The strain is being linked to increased cases throughout parts of Europe. Over 1,000 doctors and an untold number of medical personnel have died in India due to COVID. A New York Times report has exposed that Apple has put their customer security at risk just to appease the Chinese government. This includes storing customer data on Chinese government servers, making it easy for authorities to illegally obtain sensitive information of millions of Chinese citizens. This includes emails, photos, and locations. This is illegal according to US law. Apple also banned apps from a Communist Party critic. A man has drowned due to a sudden influx of migrants from Morocco to Spain. With 6,000 people, including 1,500 minors in the group, it was the single largest crossing of migrants into the European Union. This happened on Monday. The Red Cross assisted migrants with dry clothes, blankets, and food. Most of these migrants will be returned to Morocco under prior agreements between the two countries. Coming up after the break is our in-depth analysis segment. Stay tuned to Muslim Network TV.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
Assalamu alaikum. This is Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid. Walking up and down the world's largest refugee camps, I met Sister Fatima. Well, I'm calling her a sister. She was just a teenage girl, my granddaughter's age. Her parents were slaughtered by the Burmese military, and she was dragged by the Burmese soldiers to their hut, and all night long she was violated. She lost consciousness. When she regained, and in the morning and soldiers were themselves away, she ran and hid in a vegetable patch. Some people saw her, gave her clothes, and took her 4-day-long walk to Bangladesh. Who will speak up for her? Who will stand up for her if not you and I? It's our responsibility. It's our duty, brothers and sisters in humanity. And that's why I like you to support Burma Task Force. I'm a volunteer for it. But Burma Task Force is standing up to stop this genocide, violation of our sisters. You and I are free, they are not. Please stand up, work with Burma Task Force, and donate today to Burma Task Force. Together, we can do it. Assalamu alaikum.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
Our coverage of Israel's violence in Gaza continues. Let's go to Saleha Farouk, who's with Isam Adwan, a journalist in Gaza. Over to you, Saleha.
Once again, much appreciated, Hena. Today we have a very special segment. We have with us today Isam Adwan from the Gaza, who is a project manager for the We Are Not Numbers nonprofit organization. Isam is also a human rights activist in his own right. Thank you so much for being here with us on the program.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. So you are, of course, a young person living in Gaza, and the whole world right now can see that this city is going through terrible violence and a loss of life. I want to begin, Isam, by asking you how the war is affecting young individuals such as yourself. So when it comes to children, teenagers, youth, and young adults, how have their lives mostly been changed?
Yeah, definitely. When we're talking about the situation of Gaza, imagine putting 2 million of people in 365 square kilometers. And for the past 15 years, this Gaza Strip has been blockaded with an intentional policy to suffocate every norms and every existence of humanity. People are dying because of the lack of food and because of the lack of water, because they don't have jobs, and so many other levels of dehumanizations. Such small area has faced 3 previous brutal wars. We have witnessed massacres committed, brutality against residential buildings of people, targeting buildings, including buildings contained children and women, and those things we have seen such similar scenes and videos in the war of 2008, 2012, and 2014. Unfortunately, with all these heavy prices that the Gaza Strip has been paying so far, we are encountered with an absolute ignorance by the international community, as much as the media outlets are twisting and manipulating the narratives coming out from Gaza, focusing only on the response of the political and resistance parties.
Thank you so much for providing a little bit of a background information as to what's going on the ground right now. I want to shift focus to a very unique project that you're a part of. Of course, you're a project manager of the unique and successful organization called We Are Not Numbers, which is a project that helps Palestinians share their voices in various unique ways. Just for our viewers to be able to learn more, tell us about this organization, We Are Not Numbers, and tell us about how you became involved.
Yes, We're Not Numbers is a youth organization started after the war of 2014 from Gaza. We started with the main concept that we need to tell the untold stories, and when I say need, that's because the media stream is only caring about the situation in Palestine, and especially the situation in Gaza, when there are numbers of people dying and numbers of people injured, numbers of houses bombed, and the rest of things that you hear and read about. So with the mission We Are Not Numbers for the past 5 years, and now we're entering our sixth year, we have produced more than 1,000 articles of human stories. We have produced also more than 35 short documentaries, including 2 short films that won international awards. We have also contributed to international books, as for the past 2 years we have published a book with the title We Are Not Numbers in Germany.
Wonderful. Now, shifting your focus to a more leadership perspective, going back to the war crimes occurring in the region right now. Of course, some leaders have been pushing for peace and accountability, others have not. We've noticed that the Palestinian foreign minister recently told the United Nations about enforcing sanctions, as well as an arms embargo to stop the trade to Israel. The UN itself has already tried to pass 3 resolutions, all of which were blocked by the United States. The Turkish as well as Pakistani leadership have been a little bit better at advocating against the violence. But now, from your perspective as a Palestinian living in the occupied Palestinian territories, what do you think is needed from global leadership to help these communities that are unfortunately under such terrible attack right now?
I believe what is really needed to be done, because for the past 73 years, the Palestinians and the Palestinian leadership has been trying to impose sanctions on Israel through the ICC and trying to amplify our story to the international community. And we have failed so far, not because we didn't try enough, but because Israel has full impunity towards those human rights violations in Gaza, in East Jerusalem, in the Palestinian occupied territories, and so many other human rights violations that we're witnessing all over the past decades. It's not about our attempts, but it's about the impunity and the funds going into Israel. So what I'm trying to say, the Supreme countries, especially the U.S. administration, they have not only turned a blind eye and deaf ear towards our suffering, but also they contributed throughout the funds going into Israel, providing Israel of at least $3.8 billion per year. So we're not speaking here about an ignorance and the lack of commitment towards the Palestinian cause, but we're talking about a direct contribution to our suffering and to the occupation here in Palestine.
Now, thank you so much once again for being with us despite the obvious security situation, the volatility in the region. Of course, we can also see that despite the connectivity in terms of the internet coming in and out, but of course we can still see you and we can hear you, and we really appreciate you being here with us. So that just brings me to my next question. Millions of us actually around the world are curious about the local situation of Palestinians such as yourself. And I know that you're joining us from Gaza today. This kind of honest information is really hard to access from news sources that are not currently covering the situation very fairly, unfortunately. So if I can take time to ask you directly, how are you doing? How is your family and your friends and your networks around you? How are local communities in Palestine on the ground right now? How are they managing?
Unfortunately and thankfully at the same time, my suffering and the things that I'm currently encountering on a personal level, they are not as the majority of the people suffering. We have witnessed an ongoing brutality targeting of residential buildings, which contained at least 30 to 40 families inside. So we're talking about more than 400, 500 people. People are homeless and they don't have anywhere to go. They don't have access to food and water. They don't have a sufficiency of medical equipment and expertise to treat them. So we're talking about the humanitarian crisis and encountering with the ongoing aggressive assaults happening. We have witnessed, for instance, yesterday an ongoing bombardment for several hours to specific neighborhoods, and they did not only target those residential buildings contain several families inside, but they also bombed the roads going into these neighborhoods and bombed the roads going to the hospital as well. So just to say and to clarify, if people are not dying because of those bombs, they died because they died alive under the rubbles of their homes and the destroyed buildings.
Now, we began this segment by talking a little bit about what you do. Of course, you are an activist, but you're also a journalist. You have experience with translation and interpretation. If you could just go a little bit into letting us know about the kind of human rights work that you do, and from your perspective on the ground, what is something that you would like people to know about the situation? I know that you covered that a little bit, but if there's anything further along with the kind of work that you do and perhaps the different challenges right now that are threatening your work.
It is very important what I try to say every time that I'm being interviewed. What I'm trying to say, in order to understand the suffering of the people, you have to see them as people first. This is what the media stream is trying to manipulate, and this is what the media stream is focusing on. They're focusing on us, the Palestinians, as means of numbers. Numbers of people died, numbers of people injured, numbers of houses bombed. But we don't see that we're just people. We are thrive for life in peace and with dignity. We're trying to cope with the pains. We're trying to cope with those losses, trying to have a little bit of a space to live a normal life. For instance, what you saw about what you know about me, that I'm the project manager of We Are Not Numbers, but we don't know that for instance, I'm a passionate in playing guitar. As much as for the work of We Are Not Numbers, the rest of the work and the stories of We Are Not Numbers, we're trying basically to show the perspective that you don't know anything about. Of course, the large perspective, a wide perspective of our lives is linked to our suffering and the situation of Gaza, especially after those 15 years of blockade. But I believe, and I'm certain, the humanized perspective has been lost for the past 73 years. That is why I believe the work of We Are Not Numbers is very critical to educate the people that in order to understand any suffering of the people, you should see them as people first.
I know that there have been a lot of advocacy and protest efforts on the ground right now from the region. If you could let us know in a nutshell, how are people managing to come together and to get their stories out there and to get the information out there? I know that there are wonderful organizations such as We Are Not Numbers, but are there any other methods that local people on the ground are using to get their story out there or to get important news out there that maybe us viewers can turn to when looking for the real events behind the scenes?
Unfortunately, because the people of Gaza, especially the people of Gaza, has been living this cycle of death for the past 15 years. People are deprived the sense, I would say, the sense of life. They don't know that what they are suffering and what they consider normal, it's not normal for the people outside. That is why with the mission of We Are Not Numbers, as many other organizations, we are trying to educate the people here that their suffering is not acceptable and their suffering is not something normal that they should cope with. Of course, we are supporting and we are trying to advocate their life feelings towards, doing the life activities and practicing life as normal as possible. But of course, we're always highlighting that they need to speak out about those sufferings, about those harsh circumstances, because nobody deserves to live those harsh circumstances.
Of course, and we definitely agree with you. Issam Adwan thank you so much for joining us today. On behalf of all of us North Americans, your courage and your bravery is definitely noticed by us, and we really appreciate your time with us today. We are so inspired by speaking with you, and we are praying for you and for your communities, and we are praying for the return to your safety and your security. Thank you so much once again for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. Once again, I want to thank all viewers for tuning in for another news analysis segment. Today was a very special interview with Hissam Adwan, who is a project manager of We Are Not Numbers, and he has joined us today from Gaza. Back to Hena in the newsroom.
Thank you, Saleha. Before we move on to our next in-depth analysis, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back after these messages.
Our fellow Americans.
Right now, the COVID-19 vaccines are available to millions of Americans.
And soon, they will be available to everyone.
The science is clear. These vaccines will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
They could save your life.
So we urge you to get vaccinated when it's available to you.
That's the first step to ending the pandemic and moving our country forward. It's up to you.
Friends, our world is pulling together like never before. We're making huge sacrifices to keep one another safe. Scientists are working non-stop to develop COVID-19 vaccines and treatments. A vaccine will get our economies moving. It will tell our loved ones we're safe again. But we have challenges we must address. Right now, huge pharmaceutical companies are keeping the vaccine research a secret. They're deciding how many vaccines get made, how much to charge for them, and who gets vaccinated. This will no doubt leave billions of people behind. Pharma companies are putting profit, not people, first. Yet, billions of dollars of taxpayers' money is funding their work. We cannot let the CEOs of a handful of pharmaceutical companies decide our future. We need a vaccine that everyone can have free of charge, no matter where you live or whether you're rich or you're poor. We need companies to share all their research so we can make enough safe vaccines for everyone. We need a vaccine owned by all of us. To end this COVID-19 pandemic, we need to pull together once more.
Dad, they took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear. Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. President Joe Biden has expressed tepid support for a ceasefire as Israel's bombing on Palestine continues into its second week. The United States provides over $3 billion in military aid to Israel. Just last month, President Joe Biden approved an additional $735 million of missiles to Israel. To discuss U.S. funding of Israel, let's go to Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid.
Thank you, Hena. And welcome to Muslim Network TV, Professor Francis Boyle.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having me on.
Walaikum salam. Peace be with you. Professor Boyle is professor of law at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, and he has written a book on Palestine, Palestinians, and the international law. I came to know him through his passionate struggle to get genocide of Bosnia fought against and declared as a genocide. Professor, do you believe that Israel is committing war crimes right now?
Well, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and this is part and parcel of their outright campaign of genocide against the Palestinians. And in that regard, I single-handedly won 2 world court orders for the Republic of Bosnia-Herzegovina against Yugoslavia to cease and desist from committing all acts of genocide against the Bosnians. This was the first time ever that any government or lawyer had ever won 2 orders in one case since the World Court was founded in 1921. So yes, I've successfully litigated genocide at the International Court of Justice, and this is outright genocide that Israel has consistently practiced against the Palestinians, not just war crimes, not just crimes against humanity, but we're talking here outright genocide.
Professor, you have been very clear in articulating that, but the Human Rights Watch and B'Tselem, who this year both came out calling it apartheid, and is apartheid a crime in the international law, and why they are stopping calling it short of calling it a genocide?
Right. Under the International Convention on the Prohibition and Elimination of Apartheid, apartheid is a crime against humanity. It says that right in there. But, you know, these organizations are Zionist-oriented, and they don't want to go so far as to say it's genocide, because the Nazis committed genocide against the Jews. And I guess they don't want to own up to that.
So do you think you consider that to be a sort of a political decision instead of a decision based on the legal definition of international law?
Well, sure. If I spent 4 years on the board of directors of Amnesty International USA, so I know how all these human rights NGOs work. They're all highly politicized, especially when it comes to Israel and Palestine. And they are very reluctant to severely criticize Israel. To give you an example, fine, you mentioned Human Rights Watch and B'Tselem come out and say it's apartheid. Excuse me, I argued this as early as November 2000. Let me repeat that, November 2000, in a speech I gave at Illinois State University about 90 minutes down the road here, where we needed to set up a divestment, disinvestment campaign against Israel and do to Israel what we did to the genocidal racist apartheid regime in South Africa. And that started the BDS campaign. What happened was in 2005, then, members of Palestinian civil society contacted me and said, you founded the divestment disinvestment campaign against Israel. We would like to expand that campaign to boycott, divestment, and sanctions like what was done to apartheid South Africa. Would you be prepared to go in with us? And I said, sure, of course. So I'm D in the BDS campaign, but I've argued this as far back as November 2000. I guess with Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem, better late than never. You can read, you mentioned my book, Palestine, Palestinians, and International Law. That was 2003. And in 2003, in the conclusion to my book, I go through the entire anti-apartheid convention and apply it to Israel as the basis, the legal basis for what was then the divestment disinvestment campaign against Israel, which is now the BDS campaign against Israel.
Tell us this, Professor, when you were part of the Amnesty International board, was these issues came on the board discussion which you are articulating now?
Pardon me?
Were you able to ask Amnesty International when you were serving on their board to declare Israel as an apartheid regime?
The Amnesty International board, when I was on it, was almost totally Zionist and bought and paid for, and it was almost impossible to get them to do anything against Israel and on behalf of the Palestinians. I won't go through all that here, but it was pretty much hopeless between you and me.
Okay. Tell us this, Professor, is the Biden administration, which you're saying is aiding and abetting war crimes against Israel, why you're charging Biden administration with these things?
Well, it's very clear now that 4 times in a row, the Biden administration, undoubtedly under instructions from President Biden, have thwarted the United Nations Security Council from doing anything about this situation. Under Article 24 of the United Nations Charter, to which the United States government is a party, the Security Council has primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. That obligation is certainly binding on the United States government as a permanent member of the Security Council to maintain international peace and security. And yet 4 times in a row now, the Biden administration has stopped the UN Security Council from doing anything as recently as yesterday. So certainly this is aiding and abetting what Israel, the genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity that Israel is inflicting upon the Palestinians today as we speak. In addition, Biden just approved the sale of over $300 million of high precision munitions, JATMs, to Israel, which today, as we speak, the Israeli Air Force is using U.S. JATMs to exterminate Palestinians in Gaza. You can just watch it on the television. Those are all U.S. JATMs. And Biden has just agreed to send them more. They're running out.
So almost $700 million. So you also say, is it in what Israel is doing, using U.S. equipment to kill Palestinian? Is it against any U.S. laws?
Yes. Well, I mean, we have the violation of the United Nations Charter. We have a violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention of 1949 by the United States. All Palestinian civilians living over there in occupied Palestine, which includes Gaza, are protected persons under the Fourth Geneva Convention. And yet Israel is committing wanton violations of the Fourth Geneva Convention. I document that in my book, Palestine, Palestinians, International Law. But under Article 1 of the Fort Geneva Convention, the United States government has an obligation not only to obey, but to ensure obedience by other contracting parties to the Fort Geneva Convention. And the United States government under Biden now has refused to secure obedience by Israel, even though it very easily could if it wanted to. At one point, the late President Perez publicly stated, I have this admission in another book I wrote, The Palestinian Right of Return Under International Law, that Israel, he publicly says Israel's completely dependent upon the Americans. They can't do anything without our permission. So Biden could stop these massive violations of the Fort Geneva Convention. He's refused. Indeed, in 1986, I went into the U.S. Embassy there in Tel Aviv at that time, after having spent 2 weeks traveling all up and down occupied Palestine, including Gaza, and to see all the war crimes at that time that Israel had been inflicting on the Palestinians. And I complained to the consular official there that these were war crimes, and what is the United States government doing about it? And the consular said, well, this is an internal affair of Israel, and we're not going to get involved. And I said, well, that just is not the case. The United States government is a party to the Fort Geneva Convention. We have an obligation to ensure that Israel obeys the Fort Geneva Convention with respect to protected Palestinians, especially when we're arming, equipping, supplying, and paying for them. Instead of responding to my legal point, he said, well, you'll just have to take that up with the State Department in Washington, D.C. In other words, he had no defense. Likewise, the United States government is, Biden himself, violating the Arms Export Control Act, the U.S. Arms Export Control Act, that prohibits the use of U.S. weapons except in legitimate self-defense under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. That is not the case here. The World Court has already rejected that argument by Israel in its advisory opinion on the wall. There is also a military defense transfer agreement between the United States and Israel specifically that says U.S. weapons can only be used in legitimate self-defense under Article 51. That's being violated, and Biden's letting them get away with it. All U.S. military equipment under the Arms Export Control Act and our military supply agreement should be immediately cut off. Biden's refused to do it. We cut it off for a period of time. Obama did with El-Sisi. And then likewise, the Leahy Amendment after Senator Leahy, that any military unit found to be in violation, gross violation of fundamental human rights, must be cut off from U.S. military assistance. Clearly, that's what the Israeli Air Force is doing now. Just turn on the TV for the last 9 days, and they're just blowing the heck out of Gaza and civilian infrastructure and the people. We now have 220 dead Palestinians, 10,000 injured. Hospitals are overflowing. So those are just beginners for U.S. Domestic and international laws that the Biden administration is violating here.
Professor Boyle, is it possible for U.S. citizens or U.S. organizations to somehow use the U.S. judicial system to achieve the compliance with the U.S. Arms Control Act, Export Act?
It's pretty much hopeless. I've been involved in a lot of litigation here in the United States concerning the Palestinians, and the U.S. Court system is hopelessly Zionist. So I wouldn't see anything coming of such a lawsuit, no.
So that leaves the international Court of Justice. Have you ever considered doing for Palestine what you have done for Bosnia?
Yes, I have repeatedly. Back in 1997, I was in Gaza to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Intifada. And I personally gave my proposal to President Arafat himself to sue Israel for genocide at the International Court of Justice and to seek a temporary restraining order to stop them. I also offered to sue the United States government for aiding and abetting Israeli genocide against the Palestinians. President Arafat said he'd consider it, but he did not hear back from him on that one. And then when he was murdered by the Israelis, Sharon, President Abbas was elected by the PLO executive committee to take his place. And I then submitted my proposal to President Abbas, which he has now. Whether he decides to do this, I don't know. I'm just a lawyer. He's the president of the state of Palestine.
Do you think international law has enough teeth to stop its violators?
Well, let me put it this way. As when Dr. Haider Abdel-Shafi, head of the Middle East peace negotiations, put me in charge of drafting the Palestinian counteroffer to Oslo. And I drafted it, and then I had to argue it there with the peace team. And there was a very high-level PLO official there. I won't mention his name. And I said, we have to insist here that the Fourth Geneva Convention be obeyed in this document. And he said to me, well, Professor Boyle, what good has the Fourth Geneva Convention ever done me and my people? And I said right there in front of the whole delegation, I said, without the Fourth Geneva Convention, the Zionists would have stolen all of Palestine by now and expelled most of your people in another Nakba. So, I can't say that international law is going to solve everything. It isn't, but it certainly prevents a bad situation from becoming worse. Look at the work I did for the Bosnians. I'm not here to toot my own horn, but I single-handedly won those 2 world court orders for them. President Izetbegovic instructed me to sue Britain for aiding and abetting the Yugoslav genocide against the Bosnians. I disrupted the Owen Stoltenberg plan that would have carved the Republic of Bosnia-Herzegovina up into 3 little bitty pieces, destroyed their statehood under international law, robbed them of the United Nations membership, and subjected 1.5 to 2 million more Bosnians to ethnic cleansing. We already had 2 million Bosnians subjected to ethnic cleansing. So I stopped all that. Bosnia is still there today. They are a UN member state. Yes, the people still suffer terribly in Bosnia. Yes, half the country is still controlled and dominated by a gang of genocidal maniacs. But without international law, Bosnia wouldn't be there today. And, I shudder to think how many Bosnians would be dead. When I argued at the World Court, we had 200,000 dead and 40,000 raped women. So you could at least double that. So sure, international law doesn't solve anything, but it does help.
Thank you so much, Professor Boyle, for your time and for your service for humanity.
Well, thank you very much, and my best to your audience there. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Yeah.
Back to you, Hena.
Thank you for that discussion, Imam Mujahid and Professor Boyle. That's all from our Washington studio tonight. Keep watching us on Muslim Network TV. Do visit us on muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.